President Trump and Modi, the Prime Minister of India, held a phone meeting recently where they addressed quite a few important issues. Even though it was important, it wasn't really covered in the news almost anywhere because of the pandemic and the worldwide protests that we're all facing now. So if you missed it, fear not, that's why I'm here. There's a lot to dismantle here about China and the Group of Seven or G7, so let's get started. Alright, so recently Trump and Modi talked over the phone about a bunch of new important issues. Among the topics were the increase in border tensions between India and China. They talked about the WHO and its future, and they talked about the G7 summit, the upcoming summit where Trump is thinking about adding a few countries, calling it the G10 or possibly G11. So let's read a few sections of this article and talk about the subjects as they come up. Donald Trump talks China with Narendra Modi, calls him to expanded G7 meet. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Donald Trump discussed the situation at the India-China border in a telephonic conversation on Thursday. So just to give you a pretext for this, tensions have been rising for a long time on the borders between China and India, just north of the capital of India, New Delhi, north and east of that city. Recently, both countries have been adding to the military presence on the borderline, which they call the LAC, the Line of Actual Control. This line is very close to New Delhi, so it kind of makes all the inhabitants of India a little bit nervous. And even though in the beginning of June, China has said that the tensions could be resolved peacefully by talks, the last week has seen a new wave of military presence from China, including this high-ranking general who has come in to take control over the territory. Alright, so that's the first big issue. The other big issue is the G7 summit, so let's read on from here. Trump also invited Modi to attend the summit meeting of an expanded Group of Seven, or G7. The US is its current chair and hosts the summit this year. The two leaders discussed the need for reforms in the WHO. On Friday, Trump had announced the US will terminate its relationship with the WHO and said China has total control over the WHO. On Saturday, announcing the postponement of the G7 summit meeting, Trump had said it was a very outdated group. He said he did not feel the group properly represents what's going on in the world. Trump suggested Russia, South Korea, Australia, and India should be admitted, and the grouping should be called G10 or G11. During the telephonic conversation, Modi commended the US president for his creative and far-sighted approach, acknowledging the fact that such an expanded forum would be in keeping with the emerging realities of the post-COVID world. So he's thinking about adding Russia, which I don't think is likely, and he's thinking about adding South Korea, India, and Australia. What these last three countries have in common is that they are all struggling right now in one way or the other against China. And China really is a lot on Trump's mind these days. Remember that recently Trump withdrew the US permanently from the WHO. He condemned it for not being free enough of China's influence. And after many negotiations about a huge trade deal with China, it looks like that could fall to the ground now because of disputes over the origins of the pandemic. I know this is a lot of information, but stay with me, it's gonna make sense very soon. So recently, India and Australia, two of the countries that Trump wants to be admitted into the G7, signed a new defense treaty that is supposed to protect them from China's influence militarily in the Indo-Pacific and the South China Sea. The deal itself will let these two countries use each other's military bases. Now, the US already had the same deal with India, so by extension, they just gained a legal right to actually come and use the Australian military outposts within the South China Sea. So if you zoom out, there's a reason that Trump wants specifically these two countries into the G7. He is lobbying for Russia as well, but at this point I just don't think the other nations will sign on to that. All right, so let's read the final part of the article. The MEA and Trump spoke to Modi about the US presidency of the Group of Seven and conveyed his desire to expand the ambit of the grouping beyond the existing membership to include other important countries, including India. Modi said India would be happy to work with the US and other countries to ensure the success of the proposed summit. The Prime Minister expressed concern regarding the ongoing civil disturbances in the US after the death of George Floyd sparked protests and conveyed his best wishes for an early resolution of this situation. Not only has Trump reached out to New Delhi as its border tensions have spiked with China, he has also sought India's support in his decision to have the US walk out of the WHO. As for an expanded G7, the UK and Canada have opposed the readmission of Russia. The current members of the G7 are the US, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the UK. So his critics are saying that this is just another sporadic thing that Trump is trying to force through, and he's just basically being nice to India by saying that maybe they could come into the summit. But there is a good chance that he is trying to make as many allies around China as he can, and I think that's exactly what's going on here. As it is now, the US is closely allied with South Korea, with Japan, with Australia, and with India. Furthermore, they just gained legal military access to all of the naval bases of Australia and India in the South China Sea. And don't forget the few aircraft carriers that are parked in Japan because supposedly they're struck by the coronavirus. So India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and they do threaten China in the sense that they could take their manufacturing jobs. But in terms of military strength, China is obviously stronger. So I can't imagine China is going to allow the tensions on the borders to actually get out of hand. And in terms of the G7, I think Trump is making some really clever moves, but I don't think he'll be able to force it through on his own. So whether or not India, Australia, and South Korea will actually become a part of the G7 is still very much up in the air. Now, if you do look at this from China's perspective, you can kind of understand why they are getting a little bit frustrated by all of this. The US is making a lot of moves, some of them militarily, right around one of the biggest competitors in the world in terms of economy. China's not doing the same, but China is expanding its influence all across the world economically, and that includes the US. So as in all international political matters, no one can really claim to have clean paws. So remember to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.